Hi, I'm Troy Flint, Chief Information Officer for the California School Boards Association. Thank you to everyone for joining us today for our webinar, Broadband for California, Connecting to Our Promise. We've called the webinar that because we believe that broadband access for all is essential to helping California reach its potential. As you see there on the page, we simply don't have time to waste in reaching this objective. So we're going to get right into the webinar by taking care of some housekeeping details that will show the audience how to participate and to engage with our panelists today. At the end of the presentation, we're going to have a short question and answer section. We won't get to every single question, but we will try to answer all the representative questions. So to show you how to enter your questions, please draw your attention to the dashboard. For most of you, that will be a little panel on the right side of your screen, which has lots of gray menu bars. About 2/3 of the way down, you will see one of those menu bars is labeled questions, and it has an arrow pointing to the right. Click on that arrow so it's facing downward, and a box will open. Into that box, you type your question the same way as you would an email or a text, hit send, and behind the scenes, CSBA staff will go through the questions and direct those to our panelists at the end of the presentation. So let's get into the heart of it. I know you're ready to explore this material, and we have a great crew with us to help us do that today. Today's presenters are Senator Lena Gonzalez and Assemblymember Al Muratsuchi. They both have important legislation that will expand broadband access across California, and we'll dive into the details of that. We also have 2 school board members whose school districts are doing remarkably innovative work to make sure that more kids can get online for school and for all the other purposes that the internet benefits families. Those trustees are Abigail Solis from the Earlimart Elementary School District and Lorena Chavez from Eastside Union School District. We also have another example of resourcefulness and innovation at the district level, and representing that from the staff or the administrative side is Ryan Altemeyer, who is the Associate Superintendent of Business Services in the Monterey Peninsula Unified School District. Providing the historical perspective on efforts to expand broadband in California is Sunny Wright McPeak. She is President and CEO of the California Emerging Technology Fund, and they have been leading the fight to get internet into Californians' homes for many years, and it's an exciting time to think that we're about to have a breakthrough, and Sunny is going to talk more about that. And then finally, providing the Washington, D.C. and the national perspective is Reg Lichty, founder and partner of Foresight Law and Policy, a consultancy and lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. that focuses on education and communication broadband issues. And running the show today is Vernon M. Billy, the California School Boards Association CEO and Executive Director. So with no further ado, I will turn it over to Vernon for a brief statement to set the table for today's event.
Great, thank you, Troy, and hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar. Over the next 90 minutes, we'll explore how inadequate access to broadband services impacts the potential of our students, our schools, our economy, and our society as a whole. We hope to illustrate the significance of the digital divide and discuss promising initiatives to close this gap, and ultimately to bring universal broadband to California. For years, CSBA has focused on access to technology as a part of our larger effort to ensure that every student receives a high quality education. Those efforts took on even greater urgency when COVID-19 interrupted on-campus instruction and put distance learning in the spotlight. That sudden transition awakened many to the reality that schools have experienced for decades, namely that inequitable access to technology is hindering the education of some students, particularly those in low-income or rural areas. It also prevents many students and their families from taking proper advantage of opportunities that most Californians take for granted, like telehealth, online banking, internet retail, entertainment, and even access to government services. The internet is essential for full participation in our modern society. Yet 20% of Californians and roughly 1 million students lack reliable internet access. In a state that boasts to be somewhere around the 5th largest economy in the world and the center of the global technology industry, I just think it's unconscionable that 1 in every 6 students can't get online or has difficulty getting online. Look, this is a serious issue. I know all across our state, particularly, as I said, in our rural areas and even in some of our urban areas, and particularly the communities near the Oregon border, for example, they are struggling to have adequate and consistent internet service. You may have internet service, but then you travel a few miles in one direction and you struggle to find any semblance of internet service. And that's just not appropriate from our perspective. We've had decades to solve this problem, but we've waited until a time of crisis. We can't wait any longer. The time for universal broadband access is now, and I'm eager to engage today's panelists in a thoughtful conversation about this topic and what the future may hold. So with that, let's jump right into it and get started. I'd like to turn our first question over to our legislators that are with us, and then invite the rest of the panel to join in. But so to the senator and assemblymen, why is universal broadband so important? And with all the issues that California is facing, why have you prioritized this particular effort?
Senator, do you want to go first?
Either way, Mr. Assemblymember, but thanks for joining me today, Mr. Assemblymember, and thank you all for having me first and foremost. It's really great to be able to talk broadband at all levels of government and being able to include many stakeholders that I know deeply care about this issue. I think we all do. And this has been an issue that we've deeply cared about even before COVID-19 hit. I know that the Assemblymember has been working on this issue, as I have, before March of 2020. And we've talked to many of you about this very issue. So I just want to start with that, is that this has been an ongoing problem, only exacerbated by COVID-19. But universal broadband, as we know, I mean, it's so important. It is in our everyday life, as Vernon had mentioned. Every single day we are touching this. And if you are lucky enough to have adequate, fast, and reliable service, you have access to job opportunities, you have access to good quality education, telehealth services, which we know during COVID-19 was one other issue. And we know that, you know, even in low income neighborhoods, we know that telehealth services have been on the rise, which is great. That will continue to trend. But we also know that this is just an access of opportunity for so many of us. And so universal broadband for us is important. That is why we're legislating on these issues. SB4 is which we'll talk about soon, is something that I'm legislating on to upgrade the technology standards for California, but also prioritize unserved and underserved communities and empower local government and promote competition. We have to do that, especially as we have an administration now in the Biden plan and the American Recovery Plan that really talks in depth about broadband. California has to do more in this sense. And so I think this is why we need to level up our conversations as it pertains to universal broadband and actually see a goalpost and work towards that. So thank you.
If I may follow Senator Gonzalez, first of all, I want to make sure I apologize for not being able to access my webcam. You know, I feel like a parent at the beginning of the pandemic, as we're all, you know, trying to become more digitally literate and figure out, you know, how to get our kids onto the classroom Zoom. You know, it's just hard to imagine that it's been a little over a year since the statewide shutdown order was issued by the governor, and all of us parents, including myself, you know, I mean, I'm speaking from personal experience, as I'm sure the school board members and many on this webinar, that as a parent of a child that's been dealing with the distance learning realities of this past year, as well as a former school board member from the Torrance Unified School District in Los Angeles County. You know, I first of all want to thank CSBA for your leadership, as well as Sonny McPeak with the Emerging Technology Fund. I mean, we had reached out last year to how to close the digital divide. I mean, we quickly saw with the statewide shutdown how this pandemic has exposed the social inequities that pervade California as well as the rest of the country, and especially in this space of the digital divide. The iconic image of the two children sitting outside the Taco Bell in East Salinas, to try to access the internet, to do their homework. I mean, that just was a indictment on the state of California and all of us who are trying to be part of the solution, that we need to close this digital divide so that we can provide equal opportunity for all of our kids in all of our communities in all parts of the state of California. So to that end, I know that Senator Gonzalez has her bill, and I'm working with her as well as other legislators to propose several bills that the legislature will be debating this year. I am working with Assembly members Miguel Santiago and Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia in introducing AB 34, which is a $10 billion general obligation bond, the Broadband for All Bond Act of 2022. We're trying to get a ballot measure on the November 2022 ballot to authorize up to $10 billion in bond funds so that school districts, cities, counties will have the funds to be able to invest in public or municipal broadband infrastructure so that we can close this digital divide statewide and jumpstart the economic recovery. I think we all recognize that broadband infrastructure is providing the roads and the bridges of the 21st century. And we need to envision being able to provide affordable, reliable internet for all, like we provide water and electricity. So, I see Senator Gonzalez's bill and others to reform and to continue to provide funds through the California Advanced Services Fund as being the immediate solution to help close the digital divide, and my bond measure as part of the long-term solution to build the broadband infrastructure in all the state of California so that we can continue to work toward closing the digital divide.
That's great. And before we move on to the next question, I do want to thank the senator and the assemblyman for your not only being here today and your comments, but for your effort. I like to compare this effort to what it was like in California and across the country when we were building railroads or trying to put telephone lines in, right? It's the same type of effort, and I think both of you being at the forefront of that is going to, when people look back in the history books, they're going to really appreciate what you're doing. So I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you, and keep up the fight, even after this webinar.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, let me turn to our next question. So particular to education and youth development, what are the benefits of closing the digital divide? I'm going to ask our school trustees and administrator to respond to that. I think the assemblyman and senator touched on it. I mean, relative to in one aspect of equity and telehealth and so forth. But from your local standpoint, what's your thoughts on that?
I can start.
I
was gonna go. All right. So from a baseline level, this having access to internet is having a seat in the classroom, right? A lot of most of our students are not back in person, and so if they don't have access to that, they don't have access to education, period. And that for me is a fundamental right. And so that's at a baseline level. As an educator too, with my educator lens, I've been seeing a lot of the learnings and really reflecting alongside our team on what have we learned and what does this mean for the future. And I can tell you one thing, education is never going to look the same post-pandemic. We have learned a lot, and it would be a shame to let that go. Our students learn differently, and so it's important that we meet their needs. And so I can envision there being like a hybrid of online, in person, so that we truly meet the needs of our students. And so post-pandemic, once we get out of this shelter in place and come back to some normalcy, hopefully sooner than later, we're still going to be dependent on this. Our teachers have learned a lot of great things through online tools, and so we don't want to waste that. And so there's a lot of benefits there. But I think one thing I do want to bring up at a high level is this achievement opportunity gap. If we don't do something like yesterday with this and make this a norm, like a basic utility, we are going to exacerbate the achievement gap, the opportunity gap, the haves, the have-nots, and that is the big problem. And so that's what I would say is the biggest opportunity in closing this digital divide.
Hi, I'll chime in here next. I just want to start by thanking the CSBA for the opportunity. I'm proud to represent a small rural district in the San Joaquin Valley. But, you know, as a representative from the San Joaquin Valley, I'm pretty familiar with the issues that we're dealing with and the digital divide as it affects small rural districts. Before I start, I do want to note one thing, that as we have this conversation about the digital divide, we have to remember that these same students who are dealing with this inequity are the same students that are dealing with various other inequitable issues. You know, they're the same students that are living in communities that have contaminated drinking water, substandard housing, polluted air, and of course, they don't have access to broadband. So it's just another inequity that they're dealing with and trying to go to school and do their best while dealing with these various issues. Students that don't have access to internet obviously don't have access to the same opportunities that other students have. This was true before the pandemic, but the pandemic definitely exposed this at a much greater level than we've ever seen before. You know, when you think about when the pandemic first started over a year ago, the districts that were ready to respond were those districts that have greater resources than others, right? Certain districts were able to be up and running and provide virtual learning right away, while many other districts trailed behind and had to subject their students to having weekly paper packets. You know, think about the difference between being able to engage with your teacher one-on-one every day right away and those that had to wait months to be able to have that same engagement. This is just an example of what it's like not to have equity and not to have the same access. These students have been dealing with this sort of inequity way before the pandemic. This is just an opportunity to take a closer look at that. You know, some districts caught up within a few months. You know, my district was one that was very innovative and decided to put up 2 cell towers on opposite ends of the community and provide internet to our community. However, I know many rural districts that never did get connected and are still using the paper packets today. Can you imagine what a year of learning loss means to a student, especially if we could have done something to avoid that? And universal broadband is going to help us to avoid that in the future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Abigail. Ryan.
Yeah, so thank you, trustees. That was, great points, and I can sense your passion in this. And I thank you, our policymakers, for really taking the lead on this. It's a very important topic, as we're all realizing through the pandemic. But from a global or from a more practical standpoint, I should say, we wouldn't say, oh, there's, these certain kids don't have access to textbooks. That never would be acceptable, right? When we're saying students don't have access to technology or they don't have access to the internet at home, that's what we're saying, right? Everything that we do now has a digital component. We couldn't do our jobs. We couldn't have this webinar if we didn't have access to that technology. So we should expect and we should want the same things for our children and for our students. From the way that we look at this in our district is that we want to take the guesswork out for our teachers. We want them to be able to assume that they can do innovative and creative things and have assignments, have our students collaborate, have them work together outside the school. And when we can't assume or we can't guarantee that every student has access, they can't do those creative and innovative things. And so until we really tackle that issue, and so that our teachers and the school district, the school system as a whole can know for a fact that every kid has access to this resource, it's really hindering how far we can go.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to now move from the local level to kind of a more broader perspective. And so, Sunny, I'm gonna turn to you and ask you to respond to this. You know, given that California is the center of the global technology industry, which has been mentioned, why isn't the state further along the path toward universal broadband access at this point in time?
Vernon, thank you so much for including me in this conversation. The California Emerging Technology Fund for more than a decade has said digital access, digital equity is a 21st century civil right. We are so honored to be invited into the CSBA family, and I want to say to what everyone else has just so eloquently explained, amen. And now I'm going to get on in my pulpit and say that the first and obvious answer is we have not had a critical mass. Everyone who has just spoken are pioneers, trailblazers. You've been visionaries. We have had the opportunity to invest in Long Beach and to observe the way in which Senator Gonzalez was a champion as a city council member in Long Beach. Long Beach has done amazing things there, and she's brought that experience to the legislature. We have, I had the benefit of being, I think, counseled by Assemblymember Muratsuchi on the bonds, as you had first, Vernon, and CSBA had brought forward. You and Troy have been wonderful. Dennis Myers and I worked with Assemblymember Muratsuchi, and then I drank his Kool-Aid. I'm totally a fan of a big investment through bonds, through geo bonds. We want to use revenue bonds against the billion net lease that we have to get from the California Advanced Services Fund from SB4 and AB14. The trustees, so Trustee Chavez and Trustee Solis know very well what's going on, as Ryan has also just said, for each student. But it takes so long to reach that tipping point. I also want to just say, this is personal for me. I get to convene with all you really important and powerful people because I got a good public education in the San Joaquin Valley, in a small rural school district. And that made all the difference. So when we then faced the pandemic and all of these inequities were clearly there, as Abigail said before, now we had exposed not just a digital divide, but a digital cliff, as we've talked about it, with people falling into deeper poverty, greater isolation. So now coming together with all of your leadership, we need that critical mass to overcome the inertia that is always there in getting to do the right thing. I think that you are bringing us together. The action that is needed is to take the bills that have been introduced, refine them for practical implementation, but do not give up until we make that commitment for every child to learn. In California, we have at least 40% of our population not able to achieve their full potential. That is just friggin' crazy. It is leaving on the table economic productivity, and it starts with a good education. I'm going to challenge all of us to not only just invest in the technology, but use that technology to close the achievement gap, as our trustees have said. And that means changing the way we do business. I don't think we're going back to the same old paradigm. And it's very exciting when you can engage parents with the technology to be able to talk to their teachers, no matter what the home language is, to follow homework, to follow grades, to be engaged in that way. So why hasn't it happened? It is a matter of leadership. We need leaders at all levels with the guts and other anatomy to overcome the inertia that has just been holding us all back. So I can go into many more details about maybe that through point, how we engage those who have always fought us in the legislature. I mean, I can tell you, I did not get this old because it was a walk in the park going up against the industry trying to pass previous authorizations into the California Advanced Service Fund. You, Vernon, were so great to come, as Troy did, to join us with our school to home program, which does turn around low performing schools, but it's a culture change. Do not mistake an investment in technology to equate to getting to an effective education, which is why I'll come right back. When I was going to Livingston Elementary School, all of my classmates had an encyclopedia at home. I didn't. That was the equivalent of having access to the internet. My mom had to save for years so I could have an encyclopedia out in the rural part of Livingston to do homework. And so that's why it's so personal that all of us should say every child deserves a first-class education. And the good news is every child can achieve at their potential to make California golden again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sunny. And so, Sunny, I think you really set us up for my next question. And this is for the entire panel. What do you see as the major challenges now and in the future as we work towards universal broadband? I mean, I think Sunny touched on some of that, but I'd like to hear from all of you what you see as some of the challenges, whether it's Reg Beck in DC or Lorena, Abigail at the local level, and our senator and assemblyman. What do you see the challenges from where you sit in the legislature to realize this?
The first thing that comes to my mind is collaboration. And what does that mean and how do you get there? It's not as easy as saying, hey, Senator, I want to work with you. Let's do this. There's politics, there's other stuff in between, right? And Sunny, I really love the anatomy example. I think that's also like super on point. And you know who came to mind? I'll use an example of something that we're doing here in San Jose. Our current superintendent, Chris Funk, has done a phenomenal job at moving this forward, which is a project we called Eastside Access. And we've been in collaboration with the city of San Jose. I think we're unique in the nation, probably the world, in this project, where it's community, city, and school district infrastructure, where there are literally access points on top of poles, so that community members can literally open up their laptop and turn on the internet, just click on free Eastside access. But that didn't happen overnight. Eastside passed a bond in 2014, a tech bond. Our community believed in the importance of this, and our superintendent called it the homework gap. And so a few of us have spoken to how this gap has existed for a while. And so we had two leaders who were very committed and said, we are going to make this happen. Let's pass this bond and let's work in collaboration. But since 2014 up until the when the pandemic started in March, only one school community had been connected, and that's a problem. Our district is huge. We cover about half of San Jose. 80,000 families, 80,000 students plus their families are covered in our area. For only one community to be connected, that's problematic. So then I, along with other board members, I'm part of this group called the Digital Equity Coalition, started advocating at many levels of government. And we started closer collaboration with the mayor and also with other elected officials, specifically city council. And we have moved this year to 3 additional communities by the end of the summer, 70% of Eastside will be connected. So 70% of, the highest needs, which is huge. And so it's not only our high school students who are going to benefit from this, but it's their siblings, it's their tias, their parents who need that telemedicine, whatever it is. And this is why also collaboration across layers of government is so important, because it's not just the school districts that need to do it. In order to move projects like this forward, there's a lot of nitty-gritty stuff, like the permitting stuff. Oh my gosh, so much red tape. I'm like, let's talk. Let's have that accountability. What is it going to take? But it's ongoing conversation and pushing and supporting and engaging that has led us to this. So a lot of exciting work, but still a lot more to come.
I think Lorena and I are both tearing up because because it is such a passionate endeavor, and to realize that in San Jose, Mayor Liccardo, council members Esparza and Arenas and Panelists, all on the east side, there are, you've got, I think, 7 elementary districts that all feed into Eastside Union School District. It's a unique arrangement. Clearly, there was leadership, as Lorena says, to a visionary leadership. And that has to be, I think, honored and underscored and then supported. And I'm going to lobby Assemblymember Muratsuchi for you, because I think Eastside Union High School District in San Jose should be first in line, because they put up your own local money when that bond measure passes, as did LA Unified, as has Inglewood. So I just have to applaud that leadership, Vernon. I needed to step in and just say what had happened. But I also want to underscore, because we at the California Emerging Technology Fund, we administer the Digital Inclusion Fund that San Jose has gathered by collecting fees on 5G deployment. So there are 3 ISPs that are paying fees into a fund, $750 per pole attachment, and those dollars, 2/3 are taken and put right back into the community with community-based organizations to do outreach in language, outreach in culture, because it takes a lot of intensity to get all the parents engaged who are very busy doing other things in their lives. But when they are engaged, then that connection with technology helps transform the culture of schools.
If I may follow Sunny, hearing Lorena's story about her work with Eastside Union, I mean, that is exactly what I'm trying to support with this bond measure. So the bond measure wants to raise $10 billion in grant funds to be able to support efforts like Eastside Union. And Sunny's absolutely right. I mean, we need to leverage whatever funds are available, federal, state, local, school district funds to close this digital divide. AB 34 does prioritize not only serving the unserved and the underserved, but also those that can show matching funds. I know I've heard from my Congressman Ted Lieu that in order to access the federal broadband dollars, California would be in the strongest position to be able to show how we're going to match those funds with state funds, with local funds, and so I think while there's a lot of discussion taking place in terms of all these different potential pots of money, we need to emphasize the importance of leveraging those funds to bring those federal dollars to California, to bring them to our communities, so that we can all be working together to close the digital divide.
And I'll add. So that's a great story, Trustee Chavez. We're doing something very similar in Monterey Peninsula Unified. We've partnered with a local internet service provider, and we're providing wireless out into the community. We're building towers in our schools, and we're leveraging the technology that way. So the technology exists. I think one of the biggest challenges is going to be defining what universal broadband access means. It's not simply good enough to say, hey, you have access to the internet, but if you know me, I'm big on analogies. We wouldn't provide power into a home and say it's good enough that you only can turn 2 lights on at one time, right? That would never be acceptable. We need to define what that means provide adequate access so all of the things that are available on the internet for multiple people in the household actually function the way they're supposed to. And so I think really defining that, because there's different definitions out there, what maybe certain companies define as broadband access versus what we may think of what broadband access actually really is.
And I do want to add that there are a couple of other authors, legislators who are adding to what we would call a digital equity package of bills. So Assemblymember Garcia with Assemblymember Santiago and Medina have a bill on affordability that has a definition of what is adequate for affordability. That service, Ryan, that has to be able to support distance learning and telehealth at any given point in time, including going forward. And also then Assemblymember Gibson is addressing the very unique situation of residents in publicly subsidized multi-unit affordable housing complexes, both owned by government and owned by nonprofit. So for example, the Carmelitas complex in your district or in Long Beach, Senator, those residents, maybe 40–60% say they have connectivity in their units, but they don't have the devices. They don't have the digital literacy, and we do not have a solution for how to get all of those residents in the publicly subsidized housing to a point where they can learn. The last thing we want is the children in those complexes today to be the residents of tomorrow. They need to be the productive members of our communities that they can be.
And that's what I was going to mention is, this is a lot of the work that I did when I was at Microsoft, was the social responsibility realm and getting the access to these public housing units in South Los Angeles and working with nonprofits. So I think to Trustee Chavez's point, absolutely, collaboration is absolutely key. And it's all of us. It's not just government's responsibility. It's also asking more of our providers, our tech companies. We have Silicon Valley in our backyard. In Long Beach, I've got Virgin Orbit, Laserfish. We've got Verizon, who's setting up 5G small towers. How can we not ask more of them to say, we need your help and investment as well? It doesn't mean that we, want to be at odds, but I think Wi-Fi hotspots are not enough, and we've known that. We need to do more and stretch ourselves. And I also think to Ryan's point as well as the identifying the problem. I think a lot of local municipalities don't actually identify the problem. There's a lot of state, legislation going up here, but as we know, it takes some time to get legislation up here in Sacramento done. I mean, we tried it last year. I know there's been work done even before last year, before I got to the Senate, but having each municipality, like the trustee mentioned, and identifying what the true need is for who actually does not have complete, who's completely unserved, and then who's underserved, meaning very slow speeds. And how can we create our own digital inclusion roadmap and plan locally so we can benefit from any state legislation moving forward as well. And again, working in collaboration with providers, with local governments, with everybody at the table to be able to make it the best solution and outcome for all residents in that particular county or city or what have you. And, we're all doing it right now. And I really enjoy this conversation because we're all working and making our solutions in every which way. So this is great.
Can I just
quickly chime in and say one thing? Sorry. I think this is all great conversation. And a lot of times when we think about what we need to do for communities and districts, we think about the infrastructure that's needed. But I do want to mention that we cannot forget about the need to provide technical assistance to these small districts and these communities. This is new high-tech stuff that for a lot of small rural districts and communities, they just can't do on their own. So I want to remind, especially the legislators in the room on the call, that whenever we are asking and advocating for funding to make this happen, we cannot leave out the need for funding to provide technical assistance, because most of the time what happens, it ends up being a nonprofit organization, or it ends up being somebody who's not paid to help a community or a district make this happen. And we need to include that in our ask as we continue to have this conversation.
Abigail, that's a great point and a very important point. So thank you for bringing that up. And so I'm going to use that as a segue, just because I know Okay, Lorena, I can tell you want to say something. I'm gonna let you say, go ahead, jump in.
Thank you. I know East Side passed the bond, and I don't want to say that every single district can pass the bond, right? The districts cannot do it alone. This is not a sole district responsibility. School districts are underfunded. We don't have enough money to meet some of our basic needs, so please take that into account. Like, we can't do it alone. It's not just the sole district responsibility. It's a responsibility, like Senator Gonzalez said, of other like internet providers, of other community organizations, of legislators, of everyone, the whole village. So I don't want it to be like, oh, well, Eastside did it, so any school district can do it. No, we were very fortunate and very blessed, and that doesn't mean that it's the same case for everybody. So that's it. You can move on, Vernon.
Thank you. All right, good point. That's a very good point. All right, so I want to turn the focus back to our senator, and to Assemblymember Muratsuchi. So last year's legislation to address the digital divide, fizzled in the legislature. Why is this year any different, or why will it be any different from both of your perspectives?
I think that oh, thank you,
Go ahead.
Remember, you're so kind. I think that this year, as mentioned, last year was really difficult for a lot of reasons. I think we are, on the Senate side, our legislative packages, I went from 10 bills to going down to 2 bills. And then in that 2 bills, I only got 1 pass. And it was the nature of this pandemic that just fell upon us. And I think there was a lot of just us not being in session, personally, remote participating. It was a very interesting year. We didn't have a handbook that told us how to legislate during a pandemic, like none of us did, like how to educate during a pandemic, none of us. So I would say that this year is different because we all see the need. I think, again, it was highlighted just virtually with the 2 little girls at a Taco Bell in Salinas. You see it, rural Californians that the teachers are going, in buses. Or I have a friend who lives in Porterville, and she is now providing, she goes to each student and knocks on the door to hand out the paper packets. As I'm sure you all know, I'm preaching to the choir here, right? LAUSD, I mean, we've seen the issue at just in a magnifying glass, and I think everyone is ready, and we each have a slice of the pie here in terms of legislation. I'm working very, very closely with Assemblymember Abigail Curry. I'm very excited to do that as 2 women sort of leading the charge in that sense, and the Assembly colleagues, Muratsuchi, Santiago, and Garcia, working on the bond. I think we each have that slice, and we're really ready and motivated, and we're working in collaboration, as the trustee mentioned. I think that's the essence of this, is that we just want to get this done. Discussions have been wonderful. Of course, Sunny helping us along the way, and many stakeholders helping us along the way to get this done, because we all have a deep interest. And again, many of us are parents. I have 3 boys at home, a community college student, a middle schooler, and a kindergartner. I don't know why I planned it that way, but it just happened that way. And this is real for all of us. And I'm a privileged person that has that access, but I also represent a district that doesn't. Long Beach to Southeast Los Angeles to South LA, that is deeply, deeply, lots of injustices, happening. But on top of that, the digital divide is one that is at top of mind. And I think all of us need to correct and work on. So thank you.
I would just follow Senator Gonzalez. The difference between last year and this year, I completely agree that, we were just scrambling to try to keep people alive and try to deal with this unprecedented global pandemic last year, that there was just so much chaos. But I know, I really appreciate, when we started to quickly recognize this digital divide, the pandemic exposing the inequities in terms of the digital divide. We turned right away to Sunny and to CSBA, and we tried to make it work last year, but there was a lot of confusion in terms of what would be the best way to approach this. Should it be through the extension of the California Advanced Services Fund? Should it be through revenue bonds? Where's the federal government on this? But I think what has come out of a lot of those discussions from last year is the recognition that we all need to be pushing close the digital divide from all different angles. The governor issued his executive order for broadband for all last, I believe it was August. This year, both the Assembly Speaker and the Senate President Pro Tem have identified broadband as one of their top 3 priorities in both houses of the legislature. And so, I think it comes down to what Sonny said earlier. It comes down to leadership. I mean, we need to, we need to extend the CASF. We need to get state broadband dollars. We need to get those federal dollars coming into our communities in California. And one last thing I would touch on, I mean, this effort to invest in public broadband, whether it's school districts or whether it's cities or counties, I mean, it is getting opposition from the for-profit internet service providers. I mean, they're concerned that it's cutting into their market share. And so we need to. We need to work with them to try to form public-private partnerships as much as possible, but also recognize that, especially in the rural parts of the state of California, I mean, even the for-profit ISPs, the internet service providers, they have told me and others that the market is just not there to justify the broadband infrastructure in rural California. And so that is especially where it should be the obligation of the state government to build that and invest in that infrastructure.
So I'm sorry, Assemblyman, were you done?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll make sure I wasn't cutting you off. I just, before we go to the next question, because you've touched on something that actually I think leads into our next question, and it relates to whether the expansion or the build out of broadband is at a public-private partnership. What more can the private sector companies do? And I will say, I am not, and maybe because I'm in the education space, I'm not sympathetic to the argument from the private sector companies about the cost of the build out. Because I think, just like we've all sat here and talked today, they need to have some vision. Just like, 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when people were talking about electric vehicles, right? The motor companies didn't want to have any part of it. But then, 20, 30 years later, along comes Tesla, and the world turns on its head for electric vehicles and what's happening. I think it's about, for those companies, having the vision. And I would also go back to my example earlier in the presentation about the telephone companies and about the railroads, right? As a business, you have to, and from my perspective, you have to see the future, and you have to adjust and adapt to that and build your business around it. There may not be Californians living in large numbers in Siskiyou or Modoc compared to LA, but guess what? In the future, there will likely be a lot more people there. So they should be thinking about that and building out for that. So I'll get off my pedestal on that, but you brought that up, and I just, every time I hear that from these companies, it just blows my mind that they can't see the future of their business in these rural parts of the state, and developing the relationships with the legislature and the government to do the build out for future revenue. But anyway, so with that, oh, go ahead.
No, I say, Vernon, can I add to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, just first, one thing that we haven't acknowledged in this that you're all doing is just the incredible public will building that our state and local leaders, and Sonny, you as an advocate, and Vernon, you, and bringing us together. We can't tackle this problem unless the public is prepared to do the hard work of closing these infrastructure gaps. And that includes, just to build on your point, Vernon, that we have to recognize that while the market forces are incredibly powerful in this space, they're leaving, millions of people out, and millions of kids in particular. And, it's leaders like you that I think are setting the stage for public solutions. Certainly, there's not a one size fits all across the country for this, but there are also public-private partnerships. There are, opportunities to come together to step in where the market fails. And, that starts with the leadership of folks like you. And we're really poised in a way now, thanks to your leadership. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the federal funding, and hopefully that certainty will add to the ability of the legislature in California to act, to really make a giant leap forward this year. But I just wanted to echo that and thank all of you for doing that public will building.
And,
Right.
and Reg, so I'm sorry, Vernon, I was just going to thank Reg for that comment and say, so the experience that the California Emerging Technology Fund has had in legislation 2010 and 13 and 16 and 17 and 20 and now 21, with the usually with the internet service providers on the other side, with industry absolutely not stepping up, gives a perspective I'd really like to share, which is, first of all of the paid representatives of the internet service providers are people we know, we respect, we really like. As I say, I'll drink all night with them, and none of them have power to do anything in California because their firms are headquartered outside of this state. There are literally 5 men who stand between California getting to digital equity, sitting in their headquarters for these ISPs and what needs to be done. Having said that, I also want to say I'm a fierce capitalist. That capitalism has to operate in the interest of the consumer. And so we have come to, if you will, the rallying call of step up or step aside. And that needs to be defined in legislation to be able to give opportunity for what we've already paid for as taxpayers and ratepayers, a whole lot of embedded infrastructure, a lot of middle mile, a lot of backhaul that we should be able to tap into. And I also will acknowledge that those companies who are not only builders, that is, they invest the capital, and by far the most capital in infrastructure for internet that will be invested in California, no matter what we do to pass AB 34 and SB 4, it'll come from the private sector. I want companies to invest in California. I just want them, as they're building where there is a market, to also build where the market has not operated, as Reg says. And at the same time, I will give you some priority consideration, ISPs, if you are willing to build on the east side, if you are willing to build into the low-income communities and urban areas, if you're willing to go out to our rural areas, including all the tribal lands in California, then you've become our partner, and it's efficient to do it that way. But no one gets a veto on the future of California, period. So it is step up or step aside. I want to see that in all of the legislation, and we can help craft that language. And ISPs, this is time to come and decide if you're going to be our partner or if you're going to simply be a sideline for the future of this state. Now's the time to invest in California to make it golden by being our partner in serving everyone.
And if I can just add one more thing, and I appreciate Sunny for saying all of this too, is that I think we also have to look at not looking at the same pool of ISPs. And that's a lot of what the legislation I had passed or tried to pass last year and this year is promoting competition for smaller internet service providers, for local governments to get into the market, to start saying, if these larger ISPs are not playing and not doing the work that they should do in our rural communities or unserved South LA, then we need to start looking at innovative companies that will do the work and at lower cost, and local governments. How do we provide, to both of the trustees, Solis and Chavez's point, how do we provide technical assistance to local governments so they can do the work that the ISP should be doing? And that's where I think we need to start looking broader and more innovative in that sense, to be able to promote that competition, empower the local governments, and upgrade our standards. California right now doesn't even have the federal standard at 25 download, 3 upload speeds. We are behind the times. We now have a federal government that is willing to come in and possibly, help with additional funds, maybe $2 to $3 billion. We don't know. But until then, we've got to start making these policies clear at the California state level. So this is why I appreciate, again, this conversation. It's great.
I think that's an excellent point, Senator. Really good points. And Sunny, and thank you for your comments as well as that. We have more questions, but I got to tell you, I'm ready to sit down with all of you and go sit in those 5 men's office and advocate. So anytime you guys want to do that post-webinar, let me know, because I think we've got the right group right here. So I think, the next question, and I think we really, Sunny, you've already addressed this and we've talked a little bit about it. And that is, do you see universal broadband access as primarily a state responsibility or the byproduct of a public-private partnership? I think we've tackled that, but I did just want to give you one more opportunity if there's anything else you'd like to add on that before we move on, or anyone else, if we're good. Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Brian.
I was just to echo what Senator Gonzalez said. So what I think really leveraging the local internet service providers, the ones that operate within the communities, they have an intimate knowledge of the communities that they're serving. They know what the needs are. They know the limitations of the larger ISPs. They know where they're serving and they know where they're not serving, and that's their market. And so what we did in Monterey Peninsula is we partnered with a very small local internet service provider named Redshift Internet to leverage the technology that they were using to reach those hard to reach areas by the other big companies. And we use that same technology to reach our families. And so I just wanted to say, I think that's an excellent point, Senator Gonzalez. Really leveraging the local ISPs, I think, is an untapped potential in kind of the long-term plan.
And there are public agencies that are the incumbents. I will cite a couple. In Kings County, it is the Kings County Office of Education. KingsNet is what they operate, and they are the dominant provider poised to be able to really get to ubiquitous service. They should be invested in Imperial County. It is the Imperial County Office of Education that has a JPA with Imperial County that is long standing. Anza Electric, Pluma Sierra, all of those, plus the smaller, maybe private companies, as Senator Gonzalez said, that you have also, Ryan, outlined, they're willing to move in and also be given an opportunity. And many of those smaller ones have even more capital in terms of their whole operation at risk than the larger ISPs that we need to be sensitive to.
Great.
If I may.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just like to, pick up on one of Sunny's lines that I think I'm gonna start using, which is, treating the digital divide as a civil rights issue. If you don't have internet, you can't get into the classroom. I mean, if we're talking about digital access as a civil rights issue, then we should not be dependent on these for-profit corporations, to have access to be able to make this civil right a reality. I know that early on when we were talking about what the internet service providers can do during the pandemic, I mean, they started talking about, well, we're offering like $9.99, reduced cost internet access to our low-income communities. I mean, for a lot of families, they can't afford that $9.99. And so, that's why, again, I want to put in a plug for public broadband infrastructure. I mean, Sunny talked about several examples of that, but wouldn't it be wonderful if, rather than communities, families having to go to these for-profit corporations, will you provide, will you help us here? And their response being, okay, well, we can provide these discount services. Instead, if we had like the public broadband infrastructure where the state, the school districts, the communities, they would own this broadband infrastructure, and then we can have the private internet service providers to come in to pay, basically to rent, to gain access to that public broadband infrastructure. I think that is a vision and a potential that we should aspire to.
I'm going to chime in here. I was going to wait, but I'm going to talk now that the assembly member said this. Something that Reg said earlier about the public getting involved. Unfortunately, for many families, they either don't have access or they have to choose between paying a very high internet bill if they want to make access available for their families. And for the general public, they feel like they're stuck in this situation and there's nothing they can do about it. Unfortunately, they don't think they have the power to change the infrastructure around them. The good thing about this panel and this group is that we know that together, collectively, we do have the power and we believe that we can change it. The more that we start making this information available to the public and putting it in their minds, you shouldn't have to choose between, buying food or buying internet. You shouldn't have to be stuck, in a parking lot looking for a signal so your child can do their homework. The more we put that in their head, people will start to speak up and join us in this effort. So I think it was Reg who said it earlier. We need to bring in the public, let them know that it's possible to change this. Share our ideas with them, and they will join us and make our, they'll help us highlight the issue. So I think we are definitely onto something here with this group, but I definitely support making sure that we spread the word about this issue because it is really affecting people's bottom lines in everyday life.
Absolutely.
Thank you for saying that, Trustee Solis. That really resonates. And what Assembly Member mentioned earlier, like some people have to choose between, this $10 plan or food. This $10 plan, more often than not, cannot support with bandwidth for the students at home. Right? They say it's $10, but 2-3 kids can't log on and it can't sustain online learning. And so parents and families are forced to pay a lot more money, $100, $200, $300 monthly bill. Now we're talking groceries, right? Like $10 is hard, but it's not even that. And so they're deceiving our communities, which is even more problematic. And people aren't talking about that. Right? It's like, let's collaborate, which is great, but like, let's talk about what is true and what is happening right now. But we're not. And so that's also a problem that I see.
And thank you for both of you and the Assemblyman for bringing this up. I mean, he's absolutely right. All of you are right. And I think just one other little component to that, it's not only is it, $10 a month or whatever for inadequate access, but a lot of times it's $10 a month for a limited period of time. And then you start paying regular rates, what I'm going to call regular rates, and your bill has now doubled or tripled overnight. And so there's a lot there that I absolutely agree. We've got to engage our communities and the public to make them aware of what's going on. As we're running out of time, I'm going to jump to the last question, and Reggie, I'm going to ask you to kick this the response off, and then others to weigh in. But so, and we've talked a little bit about this, but where do you see? I mean, you're doing all the federal advocacy and policy work. Where do you see the intersection of federal and state policy to increase broadband access?
Well, it's an incredibly timely question, Vernon, because, after a long battle over the last 12 months, there is, in addition to the emergency education resources that can be brought to bear on this problem for students, we now have a couple of dedicated federal funds that I think the state needs to be quickly on top of. And the first is the new Emergency Connectivity Fund, a $7.1 billion appropriation that Congress provided to the FCC specifically for connecting kids and educators to both broadband and devices, right? We know that's not going to be enough nationally, but it's a great start. And CSBA, put in some excellent comments to the FCC. That rulemaking is still ongoing about how that funding should be distributed, how it should be used. And, we talked about broadband speeds. Not only is the FCC definition of 25 megabits per second download and 3 upload not sufficient. I mean, you're not achieving it in a lot of places. It's not sufficient. There's new research out there that CSBA highlighted in its excellent submission that says that it should be 25/12 per student, not per household, per student. So we need to push federal leaders to set that high bar for our telecommunications providers so that our kids have what they need when there's 1, 2, 3 kids in the household who need to connect while their parents are working from home too. The FCC has to put those new regs out by May 10th, and then the application window is going to be open, and we need to get the word out. Every California school district needs to take advantage of those funds. You need to think strategically at the state level about how to weave that funding into what you're trying to do at the state level, at the local level. So that's part one. The second big opportunity, and this one's gotten a little less media attention. Congress also provided $10 billion to the Treasury Department for a capital projects fund. Every state will get at least $100 million, but they're also going to get a plus up for population, heavier weight on rural population, and low income population. That's going to be another infusion of cash into California, specifically around broadband infrastructure that I think you need to factor into your planning for this year. And again, that's on top of, the 122 or so billion provided nationally through the Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Fund. Certainly, there are a lot of educational purposes for that money, but Congress said, hey, you can use it for connections, devices, software. You can use it for teacher training to make all of this work well online. And you can use it for public, parent engagement to help parents understand how to take advantage of all this for their kids. I think the trustees said it well, like there's just so many pieces of this puzzle, including the parent piece. So all that money's headed your way, and some of it will be used by your state education agency. Some will be decisions that our legislatures and governors are making, but decent amount coming right down to school districts. So I'll help you think about ways to collaborate together, including through CSBA, to take advantage of shared costs around this too.
Great point. Good information. Thank you, Reg. Really appreciate that. Anyone else on the last question, and any other comments you'd like to make before we wrap it up? Go ahead.
Well, I would like to comment that just building on what Reg said, after we worked with Assemblymember Muratsuchi to ask for essentially assessment of how much we needed in California, and working with Dennis Myers, and I really appreciate Erica Hoffman also working side by side with us in the legislature. We took all that analysis that we gave to Al, and then at the request of the Council on Competitive said, what does that mean for the nation? And the math that was almost on the back of an envelope, although I can support it all, said it's a $100 billion marker. Now we finally have the federal government at that level. And that conversation has, I think, moved to the point where, as Reg says, we now have to effectively take advantage of the dollars that are going to be here and be, as Kamia GC from SCAG would say, project or shovel worthy, not just shovel ready. So we want to use the dollars as well as we can. Investment in infrastructure has to be able to incent the adoption side of it for everybody who's doing infrastructure to have an eye to how affordable that's going to be to all the residents and be adequate. The existing affordable offers, that many of which I negotiated with the ISPs when they were in the middle of corporate consolidations, they're not adequate. As Lorena would say, they do not support a condition in which we've got 13 million households online simultaneously. And so we're at a point where the leadership on the ground in every school district with CSBA needs to seize the opportunity, join forces with our legislators, and now start implementing, as you've heard everyone say today.
Yeah, I'll chime in here quickly, just to wrap up. What I see more than anything is a huge opportunity. This is definitely a critical time where there are finally various resources that can be used, that can be stacked together to make real projects happen. But I think, like I said earlier, we need to note that even though the funding is there, a lot of communities, a lot of districts will not know how to make these projects happen, and they can't get them to be shovel ready or shovel worthy without some technical assistance, like I mentioned earlier. But even when they get to that point where they're thinking about a project that would work for them, it would be great to see either CSBA or a couple of groups come up with some examples of partnerships that have worked in the past, whether it's public and private, whether it's district and city or district and community, county, and share these sort of example projects that have worked for other communities to sort of be as a guiding document for other communities and districts that need the help because they're starting from scratch.
Yeah, and I'll close with this. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but I'm also part of the Digital Equity Coalition. It's a coalition of educators and trustees here, mainly across the Bay Area. And the biggest issue that we've tackled as of recently is this one, digital equity. And we are in communication with tons of folks at different layers and just advocating, being on different webinars, writing letters, you name it. So I would say to our legislators, like, we're writing to you, we're telling you what our needs are, we're hosting all these spaces, we're working on all these projects. Like, we have some answers, so answer us, talk to us, invite us for coffee. I mean, fully vaccinated now, I'll speak for myself with the mask on. But we're here, right, to support you in making decisions at multiple levels as well. So that's what I'll close with.
That's great. That's great. Ryan, any comments, last comments? And the Assemblyman, are you still with us? I don't know if you had to, you may have popped off. Okay. Ryan, any last comments?
No, I would just, thank you for putting this on, and the thing that this highlighted for me, and I hope for the people on the webinar today, is that there's a lot of people doing a lot of work around this. And so creating a space for those individuals to get together, share their experience, to share their thoughts. To Trustee Solis's point, I do think that you're going to have various levels of expertise around this, and leveraging that. And we don't do this in isolation. I would love to share the things that I do. I mean, they're all our kids. It doesn't matter what school district they attend. So the more knowledge and the things that we can share with one another to tackle this problem, I think creating space for that is important, and I appreciated this webinar today.
Great, great. Well, I want to thank all of you and the Senate and the Assemblyman for joining us today. I don't think that was him. I think he's already got off. Okay. All right. Anyway, technology. Thank you all for joining us for this panel. Great discussion. When I do these, I always feel like I learn a lot. So I want to thank you for that. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your commitment and your passion. I do have to, I'm sorry, we are CSBA. I'm going to give a shout out to my two trustees and their passion and their hard work. Lorena and Abigail, thank you so much for all that you do and for being here with us. Really appreciate it. And Ryan, on behalf of Monterey, thank you. I know you guys are doing a lot of the groundwork, a lot of the trench work to make stuff happen for our students. So thank you. And I want to thank all of our viewers today. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us. I know everybody is busy, but hopefully you got something out of this webinar that we put on today. So with that, thank you. Enjoy your day and take care.